that we looked at, go ahead and just start it from right here, is the industrialization of the South, or of the North, and the South is going to be feeding them cotton due to the textile industries. It was a good relationship, but that good relationship would be strained. Remember this era, this early 1800s or early 19th century, okay? It's called the era of good what? Feelings. But this is also going to be the era in which you will start to see that sectional divide due to slavery. Now, y'all don't have this slide, but I just want you to pay attention just for a second. In front of you is a map of the growth of slavery in the South in 1790. This is going to be right when Washington takes over as president. You'll notice that 50% and over is denoted by red. You have slavery really just in the South, a little bit Virginia. Why do you think in Virginia? Tobacco, okay, and South Carolina in particular, but you take and you fast forward that to 1860, Holy Toledo. That's the change. The growth of slavery erupts in the South in those probably approximately 75 years from that to that. And that is in large part due to the invention by Eli Whitney. What do you think it is? The cotton gin. Very good job. Now, some of these slides on your copies of your notes are a little bit dark, so if you need to pause and get a lot more down, just go ahead and pause and get it down. But this right here is entitled the Missouri Compromise. It's the first slide on page 4, I do believe. So, pause it, get it down. Okay, so in 1819, Missouri became the first actually part of the Louisiana Purchase to apply for statehood. So when it happened, okay, and when they applied for statehood, okay, this is going to threaten the balance of power in Congress because they are going to apply. You need to make sure you denote this out to the side. Missouri wants to be a slave state because it's agriculturally going to be based. The time that it applied for statehood as a slave state, there were 11 free and 11 slave states, which means everything was equal. But when Missouri wants to be slave, we're going to have a major issue because that would be 12 slave states versus 11 free, which would give the slave-holding states power. So after months of heated debate, Henry Clay needs you to make sure you get a massive denotation right there, okay? Massive circle, maybe even write it out beside. Won the majority for 3 bills that represented what we will call the Missouri Compromise. Missouri Compromise has 3 things that you have to know. First, Missouri will be a slave state, but then they're going to add a new state in the north, Maine, as a free state. Therefore, now we go from 11 free to 11 slave to now not 12 and 11, but 12 and 12. Keeping the balance, but here is the most important part. They are going to note something called the 3630 line, or some people may refer to it as the Mason-Dixon line, across the entire United States. And if you were beneath that line, ooh, there it is, you could be a slave-holding state. If you were above that line, which is a ton of Louisiana Purchase, you had to be a free state. So this Missouri Compromise of 1820, which, by the way, 1820 might be an important year. It's going to be super important to know, okay? Now, to be honest with you, I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through kind of some of this stuff. Adams versus Jackson, the election of 1824. The last person we really talked about was Monroe, okay? Monroe, era of good feelings, Monroe Doctrine. But all of a sudden, Quincy Adams comes in. Adams versus Jackson happens in 1824. Jackson, of course, was going to win the popular vote, but he had to win the electoral vote. Y'all know what that's a little bit of difference. There were 261 total electoral votes. Jackson needed 131 to win it. Jackson did not receive a majority of the electoral votes. So with that happening, the entire election had to be sent to the House of Representatives. So here's your very next slide. Let me let you pause it and get it down. All right, so Adams versus Jackson in 1824. Okay, and this is John Quincy Adams. We might want to make sure we notate that because this is, of course, not the John Adams. It's John Quincy Adams, okay? Is going to be the debacle that we will become known as the election of 1824, but really it's going to be called the corrupt bargain. Now, the first question I got for you is, what does corrupt mean? Thinking about it, you should be. Corrupt means it's bad, it's tainted, it's not ethical, it's a little bit fishy, okay? A corrupt politician is one that pockets money or something like that. So this corrupt bargain happens because this election had to go to the House of Representatives. Well, Henry Clay, okay, gives his support compromiser of the Missouri Compromise, to John Quincy Adams. He's very popular. And the House of Representatives choose Adams to be president. Well, 2 weeks later, Adams all of a sudden appoints Henry Clay as Secretary of State. So does that look funny? Yeah, it looks like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That's what I'd like you to kind of write out beside this slide. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And Jackson cries out that there was corruption, they were in on it together, and Jackson promises he would run for presidency in 1828 and he would smash Adams. Well, guess what? He runs for election in 1828 and basically smashes Adams. Let me let you pause it and get it down. You're going to be writing one of the worst elections in history right here. Okay, so an American tragedy, I'll be honest with you, this is one of the more interesting stories in American history. This election is when John Quincy Adams and Jackson head off once again, but they hate each other by this point. One anti-Jackson newspaper is going to declare that Jackson actually his mother was a common prostitute. Isn't that nice? And then any anti-Adams people are going to accuse Adams of hiring a servant girl for visiting a Russian ambassador. I'll let you decide probably what he hired her for. And also Adams was accused of using the White House to gamble. This is one of the worst elections in U.S. history for mudslinging. You think that the Republicans and the Democrats are bad right now. You should take a look at some of these, okay? It got so bad that the Adams people accused, and this is kind of an interesting story. I'll maybe ask this as an extra credit question or something. The Adams people accused Jackson's wife, okay, of actually being married to 2 men because she had actually divorced her first husband, and the paperwork had not gone through by the time she married Jackson, so they called her a bigamist, which means she had been married to 2 men at once. It upset her so much when her name was slung around in the press that she actually had a heart attack and died. So a little bit of a crazy idea there. But there's the election of 1824. That was the first one. Obviously pretty solidly even here. That's why it had to go to the House of Representatives. But 1828, look who won the whole shebang. Yep, pretty much Jackson. Adams won a little bit in the north, but it didn't matter. Jackson won. So you have a really big question here I got for you. It says, is Jackson going to be a champion for the common man, or is he going to be King Andrew? And do you see that image change right there? You've got Jackson, of course, you know he was a war hero, the Battle of New Orleans, the War of 1812. You need to know that. That's how we know him. But the question here is it going to be this Jackson on the horse, or is it going to be somebody who wants a common man, or is it going to be what we call King Andrew? Because you're going to see a lot of the stuff he doesn't always respect the Constitution to the T, if you will. Now, let me let you get this next slide down. All right, so the rise of the common man. Now, we know from past units that Jefferson is going to be your real champion for the common man. He's going to have his Jeffersonian democracy, wants education, but he wants that power to be shifted down to the common man. Well, Jackson comes up after the era of good feelings, and he wants to model himself after Jefferson, but I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think Jefferson would have appreciated it too much. Because here's some of the stuff you're looking at. One thing I want you to circle is a spoil system, putting your friends and supporters in high government jobs. Again, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You give me money for my campaign, I'll make you Secretary of Education. It doesn't matter if you can read a book. But he really wants this common man, bricklayers, farmers, blacksmiths, carpenters, the working class to come up. But here's the other thing. Jackson also stood for the common man, which was most of the population. But the one thing that's going to be different for Jackson, even though he wants land easily to obtain, is he doesn't think education is important, okay? He does not think education is as important. That is the big difference between him and Jefferson. Jefferson also respects the Constitution, whereas Jackson, not always, okay? Now, let's get this and pause this and get it down. This is a perfect example of Jackson not necessarily respecting the Constitution. Now, Jackson wants land out west. We just talked about that. Okay, but what's out west? Indians. So he needs to get rid of them. So Jackson's goal is that expansion into the Southwest for Southern farmers. That's what we're writing down here. But here's what happens. Starting in 1830, he's going to have the Indian Removal Act. Take 5 civilized tribes and forcibly remove them. Cherokee, you can see all of them right there. Seminole. Cherokee is the real big one I would circle. So Cherokee actually were in Georgia. There's going to be two court cases that you need to know about: Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, 1831, and Worcester versus Georgia, 1832. The Worcester versus Georgia is going to be the one you have to know. Please make sure you highlight it, star it. In fact, I think I bracketed it and put a star by it. This is when the Cherokee land is said to be sovereign and Georgia law does not apply in the Cherokee Nation, which technically means who's in charge. What does sovereign mean? Cherokee law is sovereign. That means Cherokee law is the power. So the Supreme Court of the United States, and since Marbury versus Madison, they're in charge. They said Cherokee law is sovereign. Well, John Marshall, remember him? The Marshall Court, Marbury versus Madison. He says Cherokee have the right to be there. You cannot remove them. Well, Jackson literally has a quote that goes down in history and says, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. I want you to underline the word enforce like 3 times. Then, out below it, put an arrow and put executive branch. Guess what? The executive branch enforces laws. And Jackson says, now the Supreme Court can. Can the Supreme Court really do it? Absolutely not. So Jackson removed the Cherokee in what we know as the Trail of Tears. Now, with the Trail of Tears, I'm going to be honest with you, I think you guys already know about it. I would just make a notation out beside this slide. Trail of Tears, there was this Cherokee sovereign nation. Settlers wanted the land, though, so the Cherokee actually had to fight for it in court. Smartest thing ever is when you fight for something in court. So this Samuel Worcester defies Georgia law, remains on Cherokee land, and literally Worcester versus Georgia is basically saying that the Supreme Court says all Cherokee land is sovereign, but then Jackson refused to enforce it. Famous quote, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Well, he can't, which is what led to the Trail of Tears, which of course you know about. Cherokee all the way to Oklahoma. It might be a good quiz question there. Where the Trail of Tears lead? Oklahoma. Now, this is a really interesting quote real quick. Not in your notes here, but it's something you might want to read. We might talk about it in class. It makes me cry almost every single time. All right, nullification crisis. I'm going to be honest with you, okay? With this, I didn't necessarily put a ton of slides on your notes with it, but you got to listen to this, okay? The nullification crisis. So we know what it means to nullify something. To nullify is to cancel out or get rid of. You might want to write that down if you didn't know it. And here's what the nullification crisis is going to be. You might want to write it down out beside to the left. John C. Calhoun versus President Jackson. And this nullification crisis is going to demonstrate a growing conflict between the South and the North, or national power, if you will. Now, this is the slide that you guys are responsible for. Pause it, get it down. Now, to nullify a law, I told you, is to eliminate it. The nullification crisis is an argument over if the states have the right or power to eliminate a federal law. Do y'all remember the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions versus the Alien and Sedition Acts of Adams, which really sucked, but still, can you nullify a federal law? You're not supposed to if you're a state. Well, according to the Constitution, the national government always has the last word. But Jackson is going to get some opposition from this Senator John C. Calhoun. Sorry, I got mixed up there. Jackson's opposition to the nullification crisis is going to enhance his idea of being a strong president. But I'm going to be honest with you. The idea of it is going to cause a lot of issues. Now, this slide right here, and probably one of the last slides we're going to be able to get down for this set of notes, is the nullification crisis details, probably where you're going to get most of your details. Pause it, get it down. Okay, the nullification crisis is when South Carolina, you might want to think about this, wants to nullify a national tariff law of 1824 and 1828. In fact, they hated this tariff law so much that it was called a tariff of abominations. But it was a tariff, a tax on imports, right? So why they wanted to put a tariff on the national economy or the national government is because if they put a tariff on things coming in, then that means the South would buy things from the North industrial complex. So it hurt the Southern economy because they couldn't buy from the British cheaps. And then also they had to buy Northern expensive goods. Calhoun says, we just want to nullify this law, but then Jackson's going to say, you can't nullify a federal law. Sit down, shut up, or I'm going to be angry with you. Okay, I'm going to slap your mama. Okay? John C. Calhoun develops his nullification crisis back from the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, but South Carolina just freaks out. and they say, we don't want this, we don't want this. Well, all of a sudden, the national government lowers the tariff, gets what they want, and all of a sudden, a little brat state is born.